Welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. It is my distinct honor to be here in the governor's office in the great state of Indiana with Indiana's 52nd Governor, Mike Braun. Governor Braun, how are you today?
Very good. It's been an interesting year, and I guess 3 months and a few days, and never a dull moment.
Governor Braun, you have opened a remarkable opportunity for people of faith to come alongside the institution of government to serve vulnerable kids and families, to make our communities better. We've had some just remarkable discussions, even in this room, and my hope today was to be able to capture just a little bit of that for our network here in Indiana, but also for pastors, church leaders all around the country. So for those that do not know Governor Braun, again, he's the 52nd governor of our great state. And when I think of your story, it's kind of the quintessential American story, the American dream. Growing up in that small town, meeting your high school sweetheart, Maureen, and 49 years of marriage, what an inspiration that is.
50 this July.
Okay,
So.
I was hoping I hadn't missed the anniversary.
Yep.
That's what an incredible testimony that is. But graduating high school, on to Wabash College, Harvard Business School. Then you built a national business. If I get it right, 38 states, presence in 38 states. Then into public service, starting in the school board, the State House of Representatives, on to the U.S. Senate, being noted in 2018 as the most effective freshman senator. And then you came back to the great state of Indiana to serve as our
We got to acknowledge that because I had a great team out there, all three Congresses. A Congress comprises 2 years. So we found out in December of 25 that that acknowledgement came again for all 3 2-year periods we were there. So I'm proud of my team.
That's amazing. I appreciate your great work there. We'll talk a little bit later about an important resolution concerning the national debt.
Yeah.
But I want to get started with just asking you what led you into public life. I enjoy when you share this story. Hopefully you don't get tired of telling it.
So I was always interested if that door opened. Back at Wabash College, I was in the Youth for Lugar campaign. That would have been in '74. It's when he took on Birch Bayh. I think when Birch was running for a third term, he wasn't successful. He ended up winning 2 years later when he ran against the other Democratic Senator, Vance Hartke. Dan Quayle then beat Hartke, or let's see, Dan Quayle beat Bayh then in '80. So that kind of was a change of politics in Indiana because we've been kind of a state that would go wobble back and forth. And where I live, Southern Indiana, was mostly blue dog Democrats, very socially and fiscally conservative. But for me, I came from a community that was kind of one-sided politically because it's the most Catholic place in the state of Indiana. And I got 3 large parishes within our town of 8,000. Now we're about 17. So I think the biggest thing that I didn't really realize was having, because I always got asked, who was my mentor? Assuming that it maybe not be your family or your community. And it always clearly came back to where I grew up and the family I grew up within. So didn't really give that much appreciation until I lived away 2 years in Boston. And ironically, the individual that got me into the political world, pseudo-political, would have been my wife. Okay. When she wanted her own business, that's why we moved back home. Yeah. And of course, I was headed to Wall Street. That was probably the best paying job back in the late 70s. And I also took an entrepreneur's course, first one they offered at the business school. So major fork in the road, and we both agreed, let's move back home. Very unusual then. So we started to grow deeper in faith when we came back to a faith-based community, especially when the first of our 4 kids came along, which would have been in '79. Okay. And then every 3 years, another one arrived with a family of 4, now with 7 grandchildren as well. But the call came for her to be on our local school board, which isn't political, but it's definitely public service. Yeah. And back then it was more about a disciplinary issue or a building project. Okay. You didn't cover as much territory, curriculum maybe. Yeah. Now that's changed quite a bit. We've had that discussion before, but the call came for her. We live in a rural township, one of the 3 that make up the Jasper Greater Consolidated School District. And I was going to crack a joke. Why didn't you agree to be on it? They had to recruit. So if you said yes over the phone, you were on the board before the election.
Okay.
And she wrapped it up by saying, Bernie, I told you politely I can't do it. Maybe my husband would be interested. So instead of cracking a joke, I was kind of wanting to jump up and say, well, wait a minute. So I said, well, I'll think about it, and agreed to do it. So I did that for 10 years.
It's amazing.
And then Congressman Mark Messmer now was State Rep Messmer back in 14. He decided to run for state senate and called me first to see if I'd be willing to fill his seat in state government. And that I had to think about. But 2 doors opened by someone else, and I jumped through them. And, well, that brings you up to recent history.
So in church world, we have a term. It's called voluntold. So
Yes,
that's what I love
yes.
about this. Is Marine's like, hey, you
Right.
take that call. You end up on the board, and
She
and
just
here you are.
offered me up. She didn't tell me, but it gave me food for thought.
Yeah. So having met Marina, grateful that she did that.
Yeah.
And you're here now. Another question that comes up. It seems for most, I think, that running and then winning a U.S. Senate seat, that's in a sense kind of the pinnacle of American politics. Maybe you then run for president or something.
Yep.
But you finished up there, and you intentionally chose to come back to your home state of Indiana to serve. Maybe explain a little bit behind that decision.
Well, I ran on, and I would not have had amnesia like most do quickly into their first term, that they're no longer going to honor the term limits pledge they made. So I wasn't going to do it more than 2 terms, 12 years. When I saw, even with all that we got done, it was going to get worse before it got better on the financial side, especially. I mean, we're still borrowing $2 trillion a year. Seems like very little appetite for self-correction. And I saw what you could do leading a state. Of course, that was going to be a much harder political navigation. There are already 5 or 6 others that had declared that they're running for governor. So to me, it kind of made sense. It took that Senate campaign was the hardest thing I've ever done. That was 12 to 15, or I guess it was 12 hours a day, 15 months from late August of 17 through the election in November of 18. And I was out 14, 18-hour days, 6 days a week. So, and it lasted 15 months. And, you know, the primary was maybe a little easier. I had to make some decisions about how to spend my resources. And, you know, I visited all 92 counties then, and I still do that now. Right. That was campaigning, of course. So Senate is a place that, yes, board of directors of the probably most powerful entity in the world. But to me, it's run by the seat of its pants. And the founders never intended it to be run by career politicians. And smart people that generally pivot quickly out of law school into elected or appointed politics. And all of a sudden, well, you then aspire to be a U.S. Senator someday. I took 37 years of navigating through the real world. Most of what I learned that made me effective as a senator, I learned before I got there. Most of them don't know a lot, and they rely on young staffers to maybe Google it on any particular issue you're on. So I think it's just gotten to a place where we definitely need term limits and a balanced budget amendment. Since I've talked about that a lot, and everybody says it makes sense, people across the country are nearly 90% for both of them, but I knew that was going to be lip service. So came back here, and it was the right move. It was another major kind of adjustment where most people wouldn't do it. And running for higher office, once I got to the Senate, because I've been asked to do that, I didn't think that made sense at the stage of the game I'm at. And I did think it made sense to come back and run a state and show what you can do where the founders intended government to probably be most impactful, not where you're borrowing 30 cents on every dollar. We didn't do that really until Reagan cut taxes and didn't watch spending. It's the one thing I didn't like about, but it was so small and minor, but it kind of set the stage for what we've been dealing with ever since. And states, I think, are going to be the bastion of at least half of them, financial responsibility that elevates more what the Constitution was about And that's not trying to run everyone's life through a federal government that can't even figure out how to spend less than it takes in.
I know you had a Senate resolution there that passed, I think, without opposition to say national debt is a security threat. And so I appreciate your work on that. I wanted to pivot now to, you talk often of faith, family, and community. And I love the way that you frame that. I want to preface this question just a little bit. You mentioned you traveled to all 92 counties. You meet with all sorts of folks. And I appreciate your ability to even have someone come at you pretty hard and be able to kind of turn that to, okay, hey, take that, and here's how you can make that productive. And so just to preface that, but through a request of the Church Ambassador Network, we've been able to meet with you and pastors and have an opportunity even to pray with you. So I'm asking this specifically for the benefit of church leaders, because there's a command to pray for governing officials. I'm not sure that all the time we realize how powerful that can be. And so I wanted to ask you, why is that meaningful to you? And why do you prioritize that?
Well, that happened when I was running for Senate. It was on the east side of Indy. And I remember that day, I think the power went out as we were having that get together. And as we ended it up, they all came and put a hand on my shoulder that could, if not on the pastor in front of them. And it's meaningful because my faith actually grew disproportionately once I moved back. I mean, it was a very devout Catholic education. All my teachers were nuns. They were disciplinarians. And a lot of what I did in terms of going to church is because my mother said, you're going to do it. And a lot of people rebel against that. And I kind of was just agnostic on what that meant until we started having kids, until I started realizing that you're probably not running the show. You might think you are if you've had success. And then probably getting into my own religion more seriously. But a big moment was on the Senate floor when I was talking to Senator Rounds, a Catholic from South Dakota. And he was trying to convince me to join Bible study there. And it reminds me of the verse in the Bible where to have an honest conversation, there have to be at least 3 of you in it, which I love that. Because there you got a witness. It triangulates the discussion. And the easiest thing there was to say, I'll think about it. Because it was one, I already was doing the prayer breakfast on Tuesdays. That was more about political stories mixed with religion. And then as I was ready to step out of the chamber, the senator from North Dakota, the Dakotans got me that day. He was kind of eavesdropping. I didn't even see him in my peripheral vision. He said, Mike, I have been listening. I think you'd really enjoy Bible study. So that was really the thing I probably look forward to most for the second half of the Senate term. So 3 years. It was the first time I had formal Bible instruction. As a Catholic, you get a first and second reading in the gospel. And the rest was kind of up to you on your own. Here, we had a guy named Ralph Drollinger and Danielle who did Capitol Ministries. And I still do that now with the cabinet and governors that participate. Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture, holds the people that they're in person in her office in D.C. So, and then I learned that, didn't know it before, that God gave us 5 institutions, marriage and the family and the church and government and commerce. And really, I've had family and marriage, that was always simple to understand, church, but talking about commerce and government especially. And so there's a purpose for government, but not probably the way we've evolved, in our own federal government. And to me, it put a lot of structure to things I've always thought about, and religion probably and faith has been the component I've probably moved the furthest on since I've been involved in politics, and it would be especially the last 7 to 8 years.
Well, you mentioned those 2 institutions, and I appreciate you mentioning that. So we see the church and government as God ordained, and that they actually should be partners. And that can be complex at times as a First Amendment attorney, but we think that's why it's designed. And so I'm so grateful. You passed an executive order recently just fostering Indiana's faith community.
Yep.
But from the beginning, of your governorship have asked for the church's help in areas like foster care and in addiction recovery. But we've taken that seriously. As you know, we're launching county tours. We'll be in Wayne County next week, encouraging.
And ironically, and I didn't know it on the schedule, just before you, I was meeting with a lady that was at our own prayer breakfast and took note of that. And she was having questions, or how are we going to flesh this out along the lines of what we had talked about. So it is resonating.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love for you to just speak to the two groups we have in these meetings, would be church leaders, but then also government officials.
Yeah.
And sometimes this is a little new. And in fact, I joke sometimes it's a little bit like an awkward first date. Like, can we talk to one another? So would you speak to those two groups? What encouragement do you have?
Well, so for me, since I've straddled both, it doesn't seem very uncomfortable. When you're in D.C. and so little gets done, and I don't think it was ever intended for a country that embraces freedom, opportunity, liberty, including religious freedom, that you'd have a lot happening from the top down. In fact, I think that's why we risked life and treasure when we wanted to free ourselves from the yoke of, Great Britain, the king back then. So here, do you want to do it through a bureaucratic mechanism where you lose so much in the cost of the bureaucracy, not to mention all the turf that tries to be saved and defended, as opposed to just getting right to the issue and doing it with the most impact at the least cost? And I don't think that has anything that would do with the federal government, because they have the most impact with the least impact with the most cost. State governments are a little better. Faith-based organizations are even better yet. So to me, if we're all working on the same purpose, and we know one part of government is, been really dropping the ball, we need to at least focus on the parts of government, which would be maybe local governments and state governments, aligned with faith-based groups, because you're on the street. You're a lot of times knowing how this would actually work. And to me, then getting past that kind of difficulty of separation of church and state, which to me is a different concept, that doesn't mean we can't work together on solving problems.
I so appreciate that. I'm always encouraged when I share this with church leaders, many of them doing some of this work already, but to hear the encouragement from the very top of state government, I think just gives them a bounce in the step. They want to engage even further.
It's the difference between common sense and getting things done, and then being locked in either an ideology or a framework philosophically that doesn't make sense. And that's why I see so much potential.
Governor Braun, you've always been known as an entrepreneurial candidate and leader. And I'm grateful for all that's happening in Indiana. It was great to hear at the State of the State that Indiana is growing twice the rate of, if I get it right, Ohio and Illinois, 3 times the rate of Kentucky, 6 times the rate of Michigan.
Exactly.
What's not to love about the Final Four being here, and maybe we're going to get the Bears. Right?
What's not to like about either one of them?
But you also, and I think sometimes there's a divide put in between like business growth and what might be considered social issues. But over the last 2 years, you've signed a bill protecting parental rights, one of the first in the country,
right,
in one aspect. And then just this year, you've signed a bill protecting foster parents and foster orgs, that they can be themselves when they come into that setting. Why were those important? Why was that the right time to sign those bills?
So to me, being an entrepreneur, you've got a nose for opportunity. Hardest thing in building a business is not watching your expenses. If you're not good at that, you're called out fairly quickly. I always have a few catchphrases, kind of run your business like you're going broke. You'll never go broke. But the harder part of a business is growing it. How do you find new markets? Most people are uneasy with that. So if something isn't working, like in terms of all the issues we've been talking about, why don't you try a different approach? That's entrepreneurial. Because in the entrepreneurial world of business, so often people get complacent with whatever's working today. I've observed that that's got 3 to 5 years, 7 years if you're lucky, before it starts to run into diminishing returns, or to where you have to try something different. Technology would be a challenge for many businesses. I kind of drug my feet there, and it's got mixed blessings, as we're kind of seeing now in some current discussions. But here it's mostly about don't be afraid to stick your neck out, take a little risk, do things differently. And that's been a guiding principle for me. And I ask for guidance more every day, which I used to when I was young. I just kind of do that because I thought it made sense. Now I know it makes sense. And I think that's what the Creator looks for, the good Lord looks for, is not to squander the time we've got here. And all he's asking is for a little faith, to take his grace. And to me, that all blends into where kind of being an entrepreneur, a lot of what I read in the Bible is that it's about taking risk, pushing the envelope for probably the most important investment you make. And that's in your own peace of mind, your own beliefs, and your own belief in God, which I think pays the ultimate dividend later. But entrepreneurs generally are going to be willing to step out of whatever the recommended kind of approach or route would be. And here, for a lot of the problems we face that we try to solve through government, I think that's proven itself, like we talked about earlier. Let's try some other things, some other methods, maybe from the bottom up instead of the top down.
Well, as we come to the end of our time, I just had an encouragement for you, and I'd love to hear just any thought for our audience, especially as you look at the second half of your first term. So I was thinking about a scripture today, and it's something that even George Washington talked about. And you may be familiar with this line from Micah 4:4. It's like, every man sat under his vine and fig tree, and no man made him afraid. And the more I've studied it, it's actually connected to the concept of the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't just an ice cream cone at Disney World. It was the ability to live a life of virtue and to pursue a cause, to serve your neighbor well. But that was the pursuit of happiness. Now, I'm not a mushroom hunter like you, but I was sitting under a tree in my backyard. It wasn't a vine or fig tree. But I was just reflecting on how Indiana is a place where faith, family, community can thrive. And we can do so raising our kids, practicing our faith, building a business, and no man can make us afraid, in a sense. And so thank you for building an Indiana like that. I'm so grateful for it. So I wanted to pass it to you. Just any kind of closing thoughts for our audience, especially as you're looking kind of that second half of the first.
So I think the most pleasing thing to me is exactly what we've been talking about has probably not been out there in the public forum, but I look at Generation Z, which I think that's the 16-year-olds to 30-year-olds, and the younger half of them are proud to talk about their faith, their family, and their community. And the fact that they are embracing almost everything we've talked about. This new generation, Alpha, which is 1 to 15, I guess, they've still got a lot of life just to enjoy and live. But hopefully we're going to see that, because I think government, humanism, all the things that the people that really push government, regardless of the cost and effectiveness, have just proven fairly clearly to me that it's not the right pathway. Here, I think we're just kind of readjusting and building it upon your faith, your family, your community, and maybe being entrepreneurial in the way you find that happening all the time in the Bible as your reference. Maybe we're getting our day here. So I feel good that for the time I'm going to spend leading Indiana, those will be the guiding principles: faith, family, community, freedom, and opportunity. I think that says it all.
Thank you so much for your leadership. Honored to work alongside you on those things.